Welcome to Firearms Friday from the Wyoming State Museum in Cheyenne. I'm Evan Green. I'm the firearms historian for the museum, and I have a really interesting and fun little carbine to talk about today. And I chose this one for a couple of reasons. One is that when I first started working on the guns in the museum's collection, I was most attracted to those that were pristine, that still had all of their finish and the nice finish on the stock, and the bore was clean, something we firearms guys would call a safe queen, indicating that it never had much actual use. So my mentor, Jim Allison, had a very different opinion. The firearms that he liked the most were the ones that actually showed they had been used. And this one definitely shows that it's been used. This one was on loan to Fort Fetterman. We cooperate with other state museums around the state, and this one just recently came back, and I was immediately attracted to it because it represents my change in how I looked at the guns in the collection. And this one definitely fits that. And although it is worn, there's missing material here on the stock right behind the tang. The carbine ring is missing, but other than that, the firearm is pretty much intact. It still has this dust cover, which prevents gradue from getting into the action. One of the things I really like about this particular gun is if you can see this worn area right here where the wood of the forend has been worn away. My dad, for those of you may know, I was raised on a ranch in eastern Colorado. My dad is the person who introduced me to firearms. He didn't have a lot of them, but he had some neat ones. He had a Winchester. This is an 1873 model, by the way. He had an 1894 Winchester rifle in 25-35 that had this same wear pattern. And that's from carrying the firearm across the saddle in front of you as you sit on the saddle. So one of the reasons this one may be looking a little beat up is it was apparently not carried in a scabbard, but carried for Lord knows how many miles just across the saddle in front of the rider so that would be ready when he needed it. Again, rear sight is probably a replacement. Dust cover's still there. Some damage here behind the tang. The screw was missing when it came in, but I was able to find a replacement kind of to hold the stock steady. But, you know, despite the way it looks, it is a sound firearm. Yeah, there's just all these marks all over the stock, the dents and dumps. But it's not, there's one crack in the forend, or maybe it's even a deep scratch, but the stock is sound. With the exception of these two missing pieces, it's all there. And once I put that screw back, it's solid on the receiver. And even though there's corrosion and discoloration, there's really no deep rust. Somebody took at least some care of this firearm, and it was obviously an important part of their life for years and years to get this amount of wear. And it spent a lot of time on horseback to have accumulated this wear under here. So, you know, we're doing a major exhibit. We're working on that now, a new exhibit of firearms in the museum's exhibit area. And I think the subtitle of that might be, Every Gun Has a Story. Sometimes we know the story, sometimes we don't, and sometimes the story isn't true. This is one I really wish we knew the story. Who had this? Who used it? Where were they? Were they in Wyoming? I know, unfortunately, there's no information at all in the accession file about where this came in, other than the name of the donor, which I tried to follow back, and it was a dead end. So it's an 1873 Winchester lever-action saddle ring carbine. And this is the evolution of lever-action firearms. Really, the first ones were a firearm called the Volcanic, and they were interesting, had the lever action and the tubular magazine, but they were very weak because the powder charge was contained in the base of the bullet. There was no cartridge case, so it was very limited in how much powder you could put in the base of that bullet and still deliver it. So, but that kind of set a standard or a type that was then further developed in the 1860 Henry lever action rifle. And again, that was vintage 1860. It saw some use during the Civil War, although it was not formally adopted by the United States military. And the 1860 Henry was chambered in a self-contained cartridge, rimfire cartridge, called the 44 Henry. And one of the classic uses of Henry rifles in Wyoming history was at the Fetterman fight in December of 1866, when Fetterman and Drummond went over Lodge Trail Ridge after relieving a wood train under attack by Indians near Fort Phil Kearny. And two civilians, Wheatley and Fisher, had asked to go along because they wanted to try out their new Henry rifles, their Henry repeating rifles. Well, who knows exactly what happened, but my theory is that Drummond took the cavalry over the hill. Fetterman's infantry followed because Fetterman heard Drummond, who had a reputation for being impetuous. Drummond went over the hill, got in a hot fight. Fetterman took the infantry to support him, and they were all killed, 80 of them, 81 counting Fetterman. Wheatley and Fisher were killed. And we have in the collection a number of 44 Henry cartridges that were picked up from the area where Wheatley and Fisher made their stand. So the next iteration was an 1860 Winchester. It had the classic brass frame, was often called by the Native Americans the Yellow Boy. It was also chambered in that 44 Henry rimfire cartridge. So the 1873 was the first model that was chambered in centerfire cartridges. 4440, which this one is, 3840, 3220. Some were made in 2520 and actually 22 long rifle. Again, this one is chambered in 4440. The 4440 was significantly more powerful, as was the 3840, more powerful than the old Henry rimfire cartridge. So it was a major advancement in the cartridges. So again, 1873 Winchester saddle ring carbine. 3 years ago, I would have passed this one by, but I've come to appreciate guns that have a story even when we don't know the story. So if you got comments or questions, put them in the section below or call the museum. I'm not here every day, but they will take a message and I will call you back. Thanks for watching.